Welcome back to episode 3 now of our series. So we left off last time talking about rational thinking and how that was established after a process of empiricism coming into the picture. And we also mentioned that the laws of nature came onto the scene so that one comprehended nature not by merely looking into, observing insects, butterflies, little microbes, etc., but attributing patterns within nature and comprehending them, apprehending them as extant things, that is, patterns as objects unto themselves, and then we call them lawful or covering laws, that they covered a particular domain as a kind of pattern that's regulative and is predictive and so on, side by side with the upscaling of mind, nous or ratio, the mind thing, as that which is making sense of, which is comprehending what it sees before it as covering laws, that there are these patterns that allow for prediction. So 18th, 19th century science, scientific thinking in the mind, was predominantly concerned with not so much the facts, but having a secure basis, what would be a firm, secure basis for understanding, and that the mind will then be able to assign these laws being operative in nature. So in this period, in this scientific civilization, that mindset, Heisenberg argues, there's an argument that he makes, that we begin to see physis or nature as having a group of elements, fire, earth, water, compounds, etc. So different groups of compound elements, and then later, heading into the later 19th century into the 20th century, we discern a shift, and it's a shift away from the elements to different groups of connections. There's still matter and there's still experience there in the world. How do we understand events and phenomena experientially through the senses? But now remember, mind is attributing these laws within nature to understand the patterns and the regularities of phenomena and the events, to predict further events, further unfolding phenomena. But increasingly, rather than the elemental and the compounds, he's highlighting, the physicist is aware of now the connections between micro points and the cosmic macro points. And points begin to emerge gradually through mathematical analysis. There's an aspect of mathematical development, inquiry, called analysis mathematics, and constructive mathematics, and they too, through the mind, the rational thinking that we refer to as mind, identify more and more objects which are not necessarily natural elements or compounds. It's rather their relations of ratios, symmetries and asymmetries, so that we see things bundling up together and separating. At one point in Mitteleuropa, Central Europe, they were thinking of force, what we call energy, electricity, magnetism, as forces of attraction and forces of repulsion. Attraction and repulsion, which is where it all began in ancient Greece with a physicist, a natural philosophy thinker called Empedocles, and he does this, and he says, why things are as they are, what is the real, what is as such, what is the real, is because elements come together. Say a fire is the combination of timber tree, so growth, fiber, nitrogen, oxygen, carbon, because trees are carbon, fire, so thermodynamics, heat, and when the ignition occurs, you have fire producing heat. There's a set there of conglomerations that is coming together and also separating apart. What Plato called after Empedocles, separating is dialysis, and coming together or attraction platonically is synalogia, to synthesize or synalogia. So in different forms of algebra and geometry, we would find in the 19th century, particularly after Ludwig Boltzmann, the physicist, the first, one of the earliest to refer to the atom as an existing particle, ways that they are distinct, that is, apart and discernibly apart or individuated. The atom is individual, is atomic, and the way that they cluster. So dialysis, synalogy, coming together, pulling apart, attraction and repulsion, all those forces. So that rather than force being out there and enigmatic and sort of nowhere but everywhere, now it's the point connections, like webs of little fine point connections that emerge to explain clumps that we consider as matter, because the 19th century is looking more and more mechanically at matter as the composites of reality. The last thing to say on this point, on this matter, is that as this begins to develop more and more and become more and more successful, focusing on the empiric of matter, the infolds, the outfolds, the folding and foldings of matter, clusters, groups of connections, webs of points, all those things, there's greater and greater confidence that science as a method and science as a mode of human affair, human work, human business, is that successful that it can replace religion and it can replace other modes of life. But contrary to what we said in the previous episode, because of the explosion of optimism regarding the effects of science, the successes of science, it was also thought that you could begin then to apply scientific minds to investigate all manner of things, eventually to the mind itself, which hadn't yet occurred to be psychiatry or metapsychology, but the rational thinking that was mentioned earlier would now become scientific investigation, and instead of just restricted domains in chemistry, biology and physics, it was thought that the rigor of the scientific mind and the logic within it could extend out to all other realms of life, so that you investigate and comprehend more and more of the nature of the real, what is reality, but now naturally. Naturalistically means purely without the intervention of extraneous factors, no other authorities, no other forces, supernatural and otherwise, belief systems or moral convictions or anything like that. You exclude all those. And by way of empirical investigation, collection, you collect data, you collect butterflies, and you categorize them, you group them together. Then you use rational deduction to see the patterns within them, discern them, group them, classify them. So we developed classificatory systems after the 18th century, taxonomies, etc., and see how the points, or these web of connections, as he calls them, make more and more sense of the natural world, the physical world, but also by about 1810, 1820, it starts to be more and more of the human world. So so then when the Cambridge Don, William Wheckel, refers for the first time to the scientist, not the artist, but the natural investigator being a scientist, he imagines a religious man, a practicing friar, etc., at Cambridge, that we can be comfortable with seeing nature as just as it is was the expression, and the other matters of faith or belief regarding heavens or other beings or higher orders, etc., need not be damaged or need not be implicated by just the logical, empirical investigation of nature herself, which was understood even at Cambridge and Oxford, etc., the colleges, as God's creation. For the naturalists, the physicists, Wallace, Faraday, Maxwell, all these people, it was physis, it was nature. And nature had its own logos, meaning its own logic. Its inner workings has a logical sort of unfolding process. And if we look, we can find in the human world, society, law, the political, the moral, any human society domain, we can simply find, if we look only purely rationally and investigate what processes are at hand and what kind of patterns are discernible by using mind. So you don't have to invoke conviction, belief. We have to understand. So understanding in this, for Einstein in the German, it was understanding would be Verstehen, the concept of Verstehen and the concept of Vorstellung is to represent the patterns within the particular bud of the rose, of the flower, the cells of the dolphin and the whale, to look inside and go beyond Francis Bacon, the English-British empiricist, go beyond that and find its inner workings, but within a web, remember, within a web of connections, because we are now the heirs of that we inherit. We are the heirs of that development and that progress, that step forward, which was in tension. So I want to refer to there was a tension between the mechanistic stress on matter, everything being explainable like a machine, a kind of mechanism at work, a clockwork operation type thing, because there is no God, there is no spirit, there is no belief, etc. It just functions mechanically. That, on one side, slowly giving way, as Heisenberg outlines, to the web of interconnected point connections, that the connectivity would give rise later, although they didn't know it in the 1800s, would give rise later to particularly geometric and calculus forms of points that physics will, in his day, Heisenberg particularly, and later Schrödinger, etc., they'll refer to points, not even particles, but points to describe what we understand now as the molecular and atomic realm.